And so, be more.
I turned this on because Dennis couldn't be here tonight and asked him to record. I said, oh, my camera's in my car because I often record classes. So might as well, so I just brought it in. Okay, so let's see. In this, okay, cool. Let's see, let's start with the little basics. So I'm Lee Lemare. I'm a professor of history. I teach primarily the Middle East and Europe in a number of like specialized world history classes. I'm doing that for a bit over a decade now. And I'm the national trainer for the 42nd, which is where we are here. So, and the, I guess I want to point something out just at the beginning too, just since I'm going to be a little halting at times. I just got terrible news out of a family, and that's a little distracting. So, but I decided to keep this a little bit more informal anyway, and not stand up here and give like a speech off. And so I'm just going to run through a number of basic points anyway. But if I stop every now and then, please forgive me. Okay, so I'll start off with a couple of like basic things about me. I am not a typical politician in many ways. I certainly did not expect to be a politician, and am quite well aware I don't look like a stereotypical politician. And believe me, I'm comfortable with that, but not everyone is, right? And that's fine. So, but that's actually one of the things that sort of stands out to me. And people are often asking, like, why are you getting into this? Why do you want to run in the first place? And one of the things that really stands out to me, I mean, there's two basic areas. One very personal, and one that's more policy directed. I'll put that aside for a moment here. The personal is in my professional life, as well as in my personal life. I mean, I'm an entirely working class family. No one in my family had ever gone to college before. And I have to now look my students in the eyes, right, and realize that their expectations are sharply lower, right, than previous generations. Right. In many ways, the United States today has a lot in common with the developing world. We've been heading in the wrong direction in terms of our overall socioeconomic development. We are the richest country in the history of the world, and yet our living standards have been falling steadily for the last few decades. Today we rank about 17th in the world, right? Which, again, richest country in the history of the world. You with me here? That's a problem. Right? There's tons of areas in which this is significantly impacting people. We hear constantly in the media, and this is a pet peeve of mine. The media is deeply complicit in a lot of our problems because the economy is great, and what they're talking about is the stock market or the jobs numbers, and those are two terrible figures to use for looking at the overall economy. Right? And that we can talk about the policy issues in a bit more detail in a bit here, but my generation was the first one in American history not to exceed its parents' expectations, not to do as well, right? A lot of people I went to high school with never bought homes. They just could never afford to, right? It's been very difficult for a lot of people to try and get ahead. It's been a bit uneven, right? But not an improvement. Every single other generation in American history, always a steady improvement. The millennials that came after me, their expectations are sharply lower than mine. And the, whatever you want to call them, Zoomers, Gen Z, whatever, the people coming out of high school now, their expectations are even worse. And this is not because we cannot provide well for people. It is because of deliberate policy choices that are undermining growth in this country, undermining our basic development, undermining our socioeconomic situation as a whole. And this is having significant physical impacts on people. We have the 35th healthiest population in the world. Think about that for a moment.
It's getting worse, too.
35th, right? Quite a few countries in the developing world have considerably healthier people with longer lifespans than the United States does today, right? We should not be moving backwards. And a lot of these things, again, they come through to me personally. If you look at one of the reasons that our lifespans have fallen in the last few years, right? Because they're literally going down. Right? And it's not because some people don't live as long, it's because more people are killing themselves. Suicide is sharply up among millennials. When a lot of people in their 30s are killing themselves, it's time to take a step back and look at the overall situation. And that includes things like skyrocketing debt, increasing homelessness, declining wages, there's a lot of like discussion. I run into this all the time too, because I primarily teach obviously younger people, right? I've been teaching for a while, so I taught a bunch of millennials, and now the Gen Zs are coming into my classes. And you heard people saying, well, they're entitled and they're lazy and they don't really want to work, and that's why they're all just staying at home and living in their mother's basement or something, because they lack ambition and that, can-do spirit, and they don't want to pull themselves up out of their bootstraps. They're trying. I know people that are working very hard, and you simply cannot afford rent, healthcare, and everything else, right, at the wages they've got. I see job ads all the time for people, college degree required, salary $11 an hour. Right? How do you do this, right? And then think about the investment. This is a personal one again for me, thinking of personal reasons, because I'm an educator, right? And I look at some of the things that help to create the American middle class and to build that American dream after World War II. Education was a big one. We built a whole lot more public universities. Public universities were tuition free, and people went. They managed to get out there, get a good job, and it had a significant impact on the entire country. Not everyone goes to college, and everyone needs to, but tons of people went, and it affected everything, right? We cut tons of investment at the state level in different public universities, right? If they cut their spending, tuition has to go up, right? So instead of the federal government stepping in to make up the difference for the state spending, the states couldn't do it. Instead, the federal government set aside money for loans. And we started handing out loans, like candy bars to people. So the cost went up in tuition, people needed to go to get a job, so they have to take those loans. You see the problem there? Mm-hmm. People are now graduating with a mortgage around their necks. Right? And that's why they're still living at home. You see what the issue is here? And so these things really bother me, right? It's looking my students in the eyes and realizing, y'all are screwed, right? We messed up, right? I'm sorry, we could have done better. We could have provided better for you. More of us could have voted. We could have done a little different, paid a bit more attention to the problems here. But everyone just thought, oh, everything's great. I've got mine. Things are fine. And we just ignore the problems. So far. So that's one of my personal reasons for getting involved here. Yeah.
Related to this, what you're talking about, we all grew up in the 60s. Mm-hmm. We had JFK, we had hippies, we had the Beatles, we got the Vietnam War. There are a lot of reasons for people to become activists and get out and vote and be politically aware of the civil rights movement, all that stuff. And so my question is, for all the people the kids that you're teaching right now, what's going to make, they've got all these issues in front of them, but I don't see or feel the activism coming out of the colleges that we had 15 years ago.
That is actually a perfect one to build on, right? Because I'm going to agree with you and push back against that. On the one hand, there's a tremendous amount of political energy and activism on college campuses today. In many ways, I think that college students are no less activist than they've ever been and are more interested. The problem is their politics are taking them in different directions. They're much more likely to pay attention to, for example, things like ethical consumption, right? Or to volunteer and help out with an NGO. They don't trust politicians. And that's another one of the reasons that I personally got into it. So it takes me back to a good question about, me and what stands out about me. A lot of younger voters, well, let's be honest, it's one of the gorillas in the room. A lot of millennial voters, authenticity resonates with them. They understand that politicians are lying to them. They're scripted, they listen to focus groups, they follow teleprompters, they do what the consultants tell them to say, and they just go along with whatever policy is most likely to get them elected or re-elected, and not what we actually need to hear. And let's face it, as voters, we don't usually like hearing bad news anyway. People want they want to sell me a great dream, right? And tell me things are awesome. Right? Not tell me to work hard. And that's different. You mentioned going with JFK there, right? I mean, people used to stand up and say, we need to work hard, right? This is going to be difficult. This is going to require sacrifice. FDR demanded sacrifice. JFK demanded sacrifice. Our politicians don't anymore. They offer comfort. They offer a nice BS job. And millennial voters are aware of that. They're better educated, they're more skeptical, and they don't trust politicians. And because they don't trust politicians, they don't see the point of voting for them. So they'll show up to protests. You see them all the time on campuses. I see them showing up in different areas here, but they're less likely to join big groups, right? And that's one difference also with like the Vietnam protests often saw massive rallies there, but it's harder to mobilize those things. And when we do see them, it's much more likely there's a significant cultural backlash because we push too much against it. Look at how the Occupy movement played out for people, or how Black Lives Matter was billed as like a terrorist movement, right? It's very difficult these days to actually like engage and have a conversation without it being turned immediately into a weapon against you. So a lot of people they take their activism into other areas. I want to try and encourage people to get involved again. Right? And I think that there are politicians all across this country that are taking a similar stand and saying we need to stand up and start representing people again. We need to stop just going along with the consultants and the corporations and start talking about the real issues.
So how do you encourage people to get involved, A, and B, I forget B.
So how do you encourage people? One of them is simply to help to raise some awareness of the challenges we face. And some of that involves just pushing back against a lot of the propaganda that tells us that things are okay, right? And again, a lot of the younger voters are much more clued into how bad things are than a lot of people of my generation and yours, right? Because we're not facing some of the same exact economic challenges that a lot of them are. So some of that is simply a matter of like pushing back against it and engaging in those arguments, which not everyone is willing to do. And another is, I think it's in some ways incumbent on us, both as people to step up and get involved in politics, and as voters to choose good candidates in primaries who will actually listen to people and respond to those challenges. All right? If we just keep going on with whatever, and just turning up anybody on the ballot, it doesn't help. Right? If you give somebody that actually resonates with them, that actually seems to listen to their issues and wants to help, I think more people will care and get involved. But until they start trusting us again, it gets a lot harder. Right? So
what are you doing to make your voice heard?
Depends on a specific thing there. Should we deal with some of the more bigger questions like that a little later, or especially since I can talk about a few basic policy areas too, because that can help set up some of the later questions as well too.
Okay.
But there's a whole range of different things that we try to do both in the area as well as I'm trying to like raise the profile of the district a bit more nationally and engage on a number of different venues to try and like attract younger voters as well. But we can talk a bit more about that later too. Okay, so one thing that stands out to me in looking around at this district, you guys know it's generally speaking considered a fairly conservative area, right? I mean, Kenny Boy's been there for 28 years now, right? Which is, the first primary I voted in was in 1992. That's the year he got elected, which is getting kind of ridiculous. I'm like, are you kidding me, right? I'm not a kid anymore. He's still here? It's time to deal with him, but that's a whole different question. One of the things that stands out to me about the area though, right? Not only has it been changing considerably, right? There's more people moving out here. There's increasing Hispanic populations, increasing Muslim populations. There's tons of other migration in from other parts of the country into the area here because it's beautiful Southern California. And that's changed the demographics a bit. The last 10 years, it went from 45% Republican to 38. So that's good for us in the long run there. But they do still outnumber Democrats, and there's no way around that, which does make it a bit more of an uphill battle. One of the things that stands out to me is that a lot of times, what Democrats will do in a situation like that is they'll chase to the right, and they'll go after those Republican voters. Right? And they'll try to sway more conservative voters, specifically by trying to be more conservative themselves. But what this has done over the last 40 years is shift things gradually farther and farther right as a whole. The more Democrats have moved, the more Republicans have moved. Right? You mentioned like JFK, right? If you go back to like JFK, Johnson, go back to like FDR and whatnot. Heck, go back to like some Republicans like Eisenhower or Nixon. You know, Nixon is effectively the last liberal president we had in the sense of like a lot of the progressive policies we would talk about today. Richard Nixon, when he was first elected, was considering universal health care and a universal basic income. Nixon, though, is also at a transitional moment here during the rise of what we call the Chicago School of Economics, right, which shook up how things were working, right? The advisors he brought in there ended up setting the stage for the Reagan Revolution in the 1980s. What we have done in more recent decades is chase farther and farther over, right? Such that today, you look at a lot of the more progressive politicians in the United States and people are like, oh my God, they're crazy leftists, and they're not. They're actually the centrist option. They're literally where the Democratic Party used to be. And they're advocating the same policies that we saw with people like Johnson or FDR. But today, they seem so crazy because they're out of touch. The reason there is we've chased so far over. And the problem here in elections for us, one of the reasons that you run into an issue at the ballot box, even in areas like this, is why would you vote for Republican light when you got the Republican? What's really is the point? Statistically speaking, it's a small chunk of voters. There's a relatively small chunk of voters on the right that are swayable, and a much larger chunk of voters farther to the center and left who simply feel disenfranchised and don't vote. You guys know our voter turnout in the United States as a whole is pretty low by developed world standards. This is because a lot of people are like, yeah, neither of these clowns represent me, I'm just gonna stay home and watch TV. And that's what they do every single time. So one of the things that stands out to me is we've had a lot of candidates that have run out here that have either run as explicit centrists and come out away with 30% of the vote. Okay, well, that doesn't seem to work very well, right? Or have run on more progressive issues, but have been unwilling to talk to and listen to people, right? And been very combative and confrontational. When you walk out the door and you're screaming at people, you're not going to get anywhere, right? And that's something that personally, it's never really appealed to me, right? I have friends all over the political spectrum, right? Yes, I'm on the progressive side of the Democratic Party, right? This does not stop me from having friends who are all over the political compass and getting along perfectly well with all of them, right? Because if people treat each other with a certain amount of respect and listen, you can actually find that common humanity in them. The trick is people often get very tribal, they just focus on the letters there, and they assume the person isn't going to listen to them. I have sat down with people in this district, right, and people have come at me and said, like, hi, I voted for Trump, right? Or they say, hi, I'm a conservative MPP, right? I'm a never Trumper Republican, right? And they've had conversations with me and asked me questions. And by the end of the discussion there, we're just sitting there over coffee talking, by the end of it, it's like, they're donating, right? If you actually respond to people's concerns and lay out your own vision for it, right, without just running roughshod over people, there is a segment of the electorate that's reachable, right? And this is not just chasing after, again, some of the more like conservative MPPs. Like the fact that I could actually win arguments with some people like this as well is interesting to me. But one of the things that stands out to me also in this district, you know, Trump won this by 12 points. He won the 42nd by a massive margin. Right, which means he won it by a heavier margin than the last congressional candidates, lost by. So there are crossover voters there, right? There's actually an opportunity in it, right? From my perspective, and this is a point that I try to make a lot, Trump was running as a populist, right? He was dishonest about it, but he was talking about working class issues. He was saying, I hear you, your factory jobs are disappearing, you're worried about your kids, you're worried about your bills, I hear you. The solutions he was offering are crap, right? He, A, doesn't know what he's talking about, and B, the formula he's basically followed is the same as everyone else's, meaning he's worsened the situation for a lot of people and cost us jobs in things like manufacturing, right? But he ran as a right populist, and to me the solution to a right populist is a left populist. Right? Run on the same basic issues. Let people feel that their working class concerns are being heard, that basic kitchen table bread and butter issues are being heard and someone can respond to them. Right? Think about it. 12 by 12 points there, those are voters that we can more naturally align with our policies. The problem is a lot of people that have been running in my party as well have not been talking about those issues. Have in fact often been talking about exactly the opposite of those basic working class issues. So I'm trying to bring more focus back to that. And a lot of the policy areas that I do talk about on the campaign trail, because I'll talk about everything. I'll talk about literally any issue that comes up there. There's tons of things already on my website in terms of like issues that I care about. There's tons more I could put on there, but at some point everyone's eyes just glaze over. But I try to pitch a lot of things in my discussions with people. I try to put them basically in economic terms. And that I think helps with some people. Healthcare is a good one. Right? So people will talk about, we need universal health care because we're not taking care of people, and it's immoral that so many people are sick, and medical bankruptcies are immoral, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all true, right? The way we treat people in the United States is immoral, right? The homelessness crisis in California is a moral issue, but moral arguments are not going to work with more conservative-minded people. Right? It's the approach to life is a bit different. The morality itself is a bit different. So there's a recognition that while we're all able to talk to each other, there are different ways of thinking that matter. And this is one of the things that I can draw from my professional life in, because I'm technically what they call a historian of ideas. I study big systems of thought. So I study like religion, philosophy, economics, politics, that sort of thing, and some of that involves trying to figure out how people think and what they're doing, right? If we can frame issues a little bit differently, you can try to reach a broader coalition of people than you might normally get. So when I start talking about universal health care, I'm telling people, I will put $10,000 back in your wallet that's your money because you're being ripped off and your employer's being ripped off. Because they are. When people say, how can you afford it? How can you afford universal health care? How can you afford single payer? I'm like, we're already paying for it. In fact, we're paying twice as much as we would need to pay for it, which means we're all going to get a raise, right? Something like an actual, even like at the far end in terms of like what we can do, something like a Medicare for all sort of system would literally be the largest income rise for the middle class in more than a generation. Because people would keep so much more of their own income because their employers are being ripped off. Right? But people don't put it that way. You're stuck being put on the defensive because they're going to say, but it's a tax! Oh, it's a tax. No, it's not. It's a tax cut. Right? Because if your employer is taking 10 or 20% of your income, and I'm going to take 4, hello, you just got a big raise. So, and one of the things that I try to do in the area is take a lot of these more progressive policies and try to message them a little bit differently. So, with that, you've got my basic reasons for running, both as on a personal level and more on a policy level and more on a political level. And I want to open up then to just general questions on different subject areas. Did you have another one? Or do you want to go here first?
So you talk about the benevolent employer that when we get universal healthcare or Medicare for all, the employer is going to automatically put that money back in my paycheck. I think I haven't seen that happen.
Oh, don't trust them one little bit.
Right. So, but you mentioned working class issues. So I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more on what are working class issues and what can you do if elected to help resolve those?
Okay, so
or is there a mechanism to resolve?
Yeah, let's start with the benevolent employer, because this to me makes no sense at all. But again, I'm a fourth generation union member, right? The only way we ever actually got any good deal from employers is by organizing and pushing them to it. It has to be a tug of war back and forth in order to balance out there. So yeah, they're not going to. It has to be written into the laws. It has to be pushed as part of it. That if you are not paying out $17 grand for this person's health care, then you're giving that to them. Because employees should demand that as well. Because when you take a job that has health care, it's literally part of your compensation package. You signed a contract with that employer, this is your compensation, it includes this value that they're paying out for them. So if they then say, oh, hey, we just made a whole bunch more money and don't give it to you, take them to court on it, right? The responsible thing to do, and I don't trust it, I don't think this issue is going to be resolved before I can get in there. It has to be part of the negotiations for the legislation itself, and it has to be included in there that the employers cannot weasel back out of that. So there's recourse, and if they do try to find ways to wiggle out of that there's a way to hold them accountable for it. Working class issues in general, how to take care of your families, wages, the cost of living, right? The cost of healthcare and housing, right? The simple fact is, pay has been declining or stagnating for more than 40 years, right? It's getting close to 50 now. right? But at least since the late 70s, pay has not actually gone up if you adjust for inflation, right? It's literally stayed the same, and for some segments of the American worker, it's actually gone down, right? Now, if you at the same time adjust for productivity gains, i.e. how much more money our labor is worth, right? Every hour that I work here, you make X amount of money. Productivity has skyrocketed over the last 40 years, and pay has stayed flat. So the single biggest working class issue is workers are getting screwed, right? All the gains are being taken away, right? There are people that get out there and they talk about like the top 1% and all that stuff, and I think that's kind of like missing the point in a sense. Yes, a majority of the gains in the last few decades have gone to the top few percent in the country. The bigger question for me is looking at the bottom 50% have lost $1 trillion in wealth. What we have has actually declined, right? That to me is the single biggest working class issue out there, right? The fact that if you go back to like Johnson's war on poverty kind of issues, go back to the Kennedy-Johnson era, across the 1970s, because of Johnson era policies, poverty declined by 10% in the United States. Since that was reversed under Reagan, it has steadily climbed ever since. Right? And the poverty is increasing in the richest country in the history of the world is a working class issue, and one that genuinely offends me. And it's not that it requires any kind of handouts. What it requires is actual responsible economic stewardship. Right? And people are just not doing it. Right? We're ignoring what actually works, we're ignoring the actual data and chasing fantasies. Right? And letting people get away with those lies. So, just me as a nerd, I want to come and say, look, follow the numbers. Was there? Okay, so go ahead.
Two things that are really concerning to me are the cost of childcare for the working younger people that are raising children, and also for like your students coming out of college. I was able to come out of college and get my bachelor's degree and get my master's degree without a debt. Now it's so terrible that these people, like you said, they have almost like a house payment when they finish school.
Right.
And so then they have to try to compete with other things. But childcare is scary.
Yes.
Especially for single, like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my fiance had gotten pregnant and is a single mother. And she can't afford it. I mean, she actually has to depend upon help from family and friends and whatnot just to pay for childcare so that she can get a job at all, right? So just to work, right? And the cost of it is such that right now she works part-time. If she were to work full-time, she would make no more money because every other dollar would go to pay the childcare for the extra couple of days a week that she doesn't work now, because it is way too expensive. And I saw this personally too, just over the course of my mother's career, because she runs a childcare center, right? It is absurdly expensive, right? And that also is a choice. The simple fact is, we are the only country in the developed world to have the kind of basic social benefits of being a rich country as stingy as we are. And it has significant impact on our overall development, on our quality of life, on our health and happiness, right? There's only one other country in the world that does not provide family leave, right? So mothers giving birth, taking time off there, right? Papua New Guinea doesn't do it. When the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa can do this, and we cannot.
And vacation time too.
Yes, and vacation time all around the world is it's a given. It's in the law. Like you can take time off when you're sick. You can take time off for vacations. You can spend time with your family. Maternity and paternity leave there. Childcare credits there. It's actually cheaper when it's managed as an overall system too. This is one of the things people often don't understand. They're like, well, can't the free market or such and such there? And it just doesn't. Right? The current system is not a good way of managing those resources. I'm not for like state control over things like childcare, healthcare, or anything else. I personally don't like the model used, for example, in Britain with the National Health Service. It does actually get better results than we do, right? According to every independent analysis, it gets better results. So I'm not saying it's a bad system. It's not what I would have preferred, right? But something like the German or Dutch system, which still has perfect coverage for everybody, you know, or systems where you have like say, providing the insurance only, but provision of care is still all private, right? That doesn't hurt people. And one of the issues you often run into out here is like, well, that's going to take away my freedom, et cetera, et cetera. People get worried about that. Freedom is a big issue for a lot of Republican voters too, a lot of conservative voters. That's going to take away my freedom of choice. No, it's going to increase your freedom of choice, right? Think of it this way. What if everything that you need in terms of your health care is just covered? What if you didn't have to worry? Because right now, I mean, you guys remember in the fight over the ACA, the fight over Obamacare, people like Sarah Palin calling out, there'll be death panels, and they're going to say grandma has to die, and like, it terrified people, right? There are already death panels. They already exist, but they work in corporate bureaucracies, right, where their job is to deny care because somebody needs to make a profit, right? It already happens. What if care was just done, right? So the choice then is only between your provider, like what your physician says you need, what you want, and then it's done, right? What if you could go to the doctor of your choice because everyone took your insurance policy? That's not the case for a lot of people, right? You're stuck with whatever your particular employer provides or whatever you can get there, and you go to those particular, it actually, a single insurer, but leaving provision, done in private hands, radically increases freedom while dramatically lowering costs because you're taking the profit motive out of the insurance part. People are often like, well, I'm really attached to my healthcare insurance. No, you're not. You're attached to your providers. Who cares about the bean counter in between, right? Is it like really like the big concern most people have? Isn't the insurance company. It's going to the hospital that they like or the physician that they like, right? It's getting the level of care or the type of things covered on their policy that they like. What if your policy is going to be better, right, and cover more things, but cost you less? Right? So yeah, there's a lot of those issues like childcare. I don't understand why we ignore these things because we would actually save money and people would have a better quality of life. When you can bring both together, when you can improve people's quality of life and still have more money, it's a no-brainer to me.
I got a couple questions for you in a comment for our group. Bernie Sanders, I believe, was in town in California. Okay, yeah. Who else was in California recently? Yeah. But anyhow, the Democratic Party has identified Riverside as a battleground county. And so they have established a headquarters in Riverside.
No, Sanders does too, but the party does.
So,
the California State Party does.
Given that that's happening, those of us that are interested in participating in helping with the cause, you can make a contact there and find out what's going on with that.
Tom, could you forward that info to us?
I got that from Dennis and Peggy, so I'll get that to them and see what they have.
She's good at that.
So it's interesting to me that Riverside County has been identified that way because, like Liam was saying here, is that we're a conservative county.
So we're moving there?
Well, the county as a whole is moving in the right direction, right? At least demographically, from the position of the Democratic Party, right? It is still a harder fight in a lot of places in the state, but it's definitely completely worth fighting. And this is one issue that stands out to me a lot. I honestly don't understand why we don't engage in these fights everywhere anyway. I don't understand why we don't have a 50-state strategy. Democrats used to dominate the heartland of this country. We used to dominate farm country, right? It's not those areas got more conservative. They didn't. Nothing changed there, right? It's just that we stopped going out and engaging with people on the ground in Kansas and Oklahoma and Nebraska to the same extent that we used to. And we ceded that ground to Republicans to make their own kind of populist arguments, right? And that has been disastrous for people all across the country. We need to get back into having those conversations in the first place and try and push back against this. We need to start presenting better arguments for ourselves. So I took that as a real positive that people are willing to invest in that people are willing to do this. And a number of the bigger campaigns have opened up offices out here. You mentioned Sanders too. Riverside as well. There are people that are actually investing in the area, and that helps everybody. Every single activist, no matter what their candidate that's active here and is talking to people, right? If they're willing to have those conversations, that helps.
some of us have been around the block with, you know, people that have been running for office, particularly against Calvert. Democratic Party will not support candidates, etc., if they don't think they can win. And a lot of times you can't get their support. We've heard this over at the Southwest Dems meetings, and Julia Peacock was here last year. You know, she was a candidate, and so she kind of ran into some of that as well. My question for you is, what do you think will take for you to overcome Calvert, and what will you do?
It's a tough one, because on the one hand, I want to be very optimistic about it, and I want to say that what matters more than anything else is a good strategy, right? It matters the right kind of framing of the issues, the right kind of the ability to have conversations with people. That will really make a huge difference, and it will, right? There's a big difference you can make with that. But at the end of the day, money does still matter, right? And that's the hard part. If the kind of money that was invested in the 50th in the last election were spent here, the 42nd would be won easily, because the demographics here are better than they are in the 50th. And Amar Kampa-Najjar came within 2 points of defeating Duncan Hunter.
To tailgate on your comment there, and I think all of us experienced this last election day. As we drove around closer to the vote, you could see signs, Calvert signs all over this place. And so I know one person that had made a comment to us about that, and she said, "Why we see all these Calvert signs, but where's yours?" And the response from Julia was, "Well, we don't have that clout. You know, we don't have that bank account to crank that stuff out, you know." So again, that was one thing that she couldn't do. But what are the things you think you can do?
Now, Calvert does tend to win elections purely by advertising, name recognition, and inertia. Simple fact is, a lot of Republicans don't even like him. But he's the only horse they've got in the race. No one can run against him in the primary, so they're just stuck with him. And the Democratic Party and outside donors don't want to invest significantly enough to make the district as competitive as it could be. Right? Because demographically, it really could be. The 42nd is 30% Hispanic, right? That alone is a significant change, right? And again, the Republican numbers have been dropping steadily, right? Which means that Calvert wins every single time based upon independent votes. Right? So there is a way to win it, but it's hard to win the arguments outside to do it, given that he's been in there for 28 years. And he can sit in his butt, do nothing, never have a town hall, don't respond to voters, doesn't matter. I can tack up some orange signs and people will vote for him. That's it. So it's a hard one to get over. One of the things that I focused on, and I don't like giving the little spiels that some candidates I've seen do. It's like, oh, well, all we need is like the people out there talking, and we don't need to do anything else. Like just our energy will be enough, and it's not. You do need a serious strategy to do it, right? One thing that would really matter is finding other ways to reach out to groups of people that are not normally targeted and that don't normally feel a big welcome into it. So reaching more out to the Hispanic community is a good one. Reaching out to the growing Muslim community is a good one. Reaching out to more of the working class voters or more of the rural parts of the district. Who canvasses up in Nuevo? Right? Trying to increase engagement with people. And younger voters, so showing up on one of the campuses with somebody that they actually can relate to, right? And that can talk about issues that kind of matter to them will help a bit. Going to them in some of the ways that matter as well. So some of the social media platforms matter, right? I'm sure we've all heard of things like Facebook and Twitter and that kind of business, right? But there's tons of other things that they're using, and it seems that there's something new every year that comes out there that younger and younger kids are out there doing. So, my campaign got me into doing what are called Twitch streams, which is like a live video thing that people like start doing while people are like playing games. They start talking and they can see each other, and I just like start showing up there and like start chatting with people, right? The little like the 15-second video things you get on things like TikTok or Instagram Live. You can like pop up there and just give little quick questions. People, if they have a short attention span, they're on the go as they're moving along. They just like, oh, this guy looks interesting, and they like the thing as they're going along, and then they're going to see more of you, right? It just tells the algorithm to send more this person's way, and that can increase their engagement. Youth turnout is terrible for us out here. Absolutely horrible, right? If only 20% of millennials are going to vote, we're in trouble. Because they're the single largest voting bloc in the country.
Do we know why?
If millennials voted in every election, they would dominate. If millennials voted, right, at the same rate that boomers did, there would be 3 Republican states left.
Do we know why they don't vote?
Because they don't trust us.
It's just a matter of trust, so.
That's a significant part of it, yeah.
If it's a matter of trust, how do we win that trust? Because
Yeah.
the goal is, I think about a millennial, what are you thinking? Are you saying they can't vote, they won't vote, I know we use that term, they don't trust, but
We need to offer what appeals to them.
That's there's several things I can throw at that here. One is that's not all of it. Some of it is younger people will always vote in lower numbers here because they have more things that they're worried about. They have other things on their mind. They're trying to get started with the jobs, family, everything else here. So the fact that California makes voting so easy because we can vote early, we can vote by mail, etc., that helps to whittle that away a little bit. But people will always find an excuse. So it's never going to be at the same levels of people like in their 40s. Right? But it would be a lot higher if they had some reason to care. One big thing there is it actually relates to the money question, right? And it doesn't matter as much here because, no corporate PACs can offer money for a Democrat in this area anyway. But the simple fact is, the more money you take in from big special interests, from lobby groups, the more the dark money that people take in, the less people listen to you. I've often joked with my students that people in Congress should be wearing NASCAR jackets with the names of all their owners because they're the ones they actually listen to, right? You guys know that a lot of the people that we currently have in the House of Representatives never even read legislation, much less write it. The legislation is primarily written by special interest lobby groups and corporations. And they walk in and say, here, we'd like you to pass this, and here's $50,000 for your next election. And it just happens. Right? You occasionally get people who will admit, no, I didn't read it, when you press them on it, but a lot of times we just don't ask the question enough. Right? But the simple fact is, a lot of the millennials know that, and they know the levels of corruption there. We have higher levels of corruption in the US than most of the developed world because we allow so much of that dark money in. So money is a big reason to not trust, and another is simply being unrelatable. They just look at you and like, no.
And I would also say, like you said, there's so much vying for our attention.
Mm-hmm.
Just hearing us talk about all the issues becomes overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if the real question is for us to kind of target our focus, because there are so many things that, yes, we all agree on or have some degree of agreement on, but we haven't found that nugget that unites us for a goal. And I think Bernie has captured that in some ways by the way he speaks and what he says consistently. And he's been saying it now for over 6 years, and we've heard it constantly, and that's why I think he's doing so well. Simply because he's trying to narrow that focus. Even if you don't necessarily agree with the way it's coming out, you still understand this is the intent.
Message discipline really matters. Being able to say the same things in the same way and keep hitting on the same issues really does matter. It does help a lot.
But is it doable? That to me is really important.
One of the things that you have to be careful of is making it look like you're pandering too. If you're oversimplifying an issue, that will turn voters off as well, right? It works for some people, but not others. One of the things that I try to do, and again, I'm never going to have the same level of message discipline as Sanders, but I hit a lot of the same points over and over again. I hit a lot of the same issues over and over again. And I try to keep that focus on the economy, right? Because I feel it offers a way to reach out to both progressive and Democratic voters, as well as to some of the independents we would need, right? By keeping an economic focus in the race, and we're not getting distracted by tons of other issues on the outside. If people want to ask anything, I'll talk about anything. But I talk about the same kinds of things over and over again. I also, though, vary a bit in terms of, well, based upon the venue. So, for example, on some of the video stuff, I mean, some of those videos are as short as 15 seconds. right? If you're going to engage on something like TikTok, you got to get it across in 15 seconds. If you want to be on Instagram, it's 1 minute or less, right? So they don't have time to get bored of you, right? You hit them with an idea and they move on to the next thing. So if you can hit that idea very concisely and leave it in someone's mind, if they're interested, they come back. And when people want more detail, if they want to meet in a larger venue like this, if they want to meet in a more informal thing like the whole coffee or beer with the candidate kind of like situations, I'll talk to anybody. But I'm not going to have long rambling conversations from a podium, right? In a big speech, if you've got a ton of people in the park. It really depends to me on where you are. But some of that also it's just differences in personality too. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you are a professor at a college.
Mm-hmm.
And last year, or years ago, when Julia Peacock was here, or we went to a couple of their rallies, and she had a lot of young people, and she was a teacher, on her staff. So I'm curious about your staff and how much energy are you getting right now? Well, in terms of just staffing from college kids that know you.
Yeah, well, one of the tricks there.
That's kind of the core, I would think, that you'd almost start out with.
Oh yeah. One of the problems is that, and this is actually an issue that I like to raise for people too, if you want to talk about our long-term development in this area, the 42nd is a large congressional district with not a single university. I can't teach here. I teach in Orange County, in LA County, and I occasionally moonlight in San Diego. So I live in Riverside County, I teach in 3 other counties. All right, because it's simply not possible here. There are relatively few in the Inland Empire at all. Right? We have 2 community colleges, and they're both relatively small, and that's the entirety of the higher education in the 42nd. I've done events on those campuses. I do have a number of my students or former students that have been involved in the campaign. In fact, my former campaign manager who got the campaign launched was a former student of mine 8 years ago. So a lot of people did manage to keep touch. There's a bit of energy. There's a lot of volunteers out there. A number of people that are sending out emails and text banking and whatnot. And some people who do, they drive way out of their way to come in here, right, and help out. Our campaign volunteers who did know me from that life. And a lot of the other people in the district too, because I have done events with younger audiences out here. I spoke at the Riverside County Young Democrats, the Temecula Valley Young Democrats. I got the endorsement of the California Young Democrats as a whole. And a number of people have come to me that way and are volunteers. I've also done events at some of the high schools. All right, so I picked up a few volunteers at Great Oak High School and a few other places like that. So that will help in the long run as well.
A couple of things I want to. Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, Liam, I can't disagree with most of what you said, but my question to you is, okay, you're dealing with a lot of youth. We're at the other end of that spectrum. Why should I vote for you?
So that's a tricky one. So on the one hand there is still the question, what are we all leaving behind too? Right? What are we leaving behind? Right? What life do we want for our kids, for our grandkids? Right? And there's tons of issues that matter there. Some of those basic kitchen table working class issues matter. Do we want our grandkids to suffer as much as they will if we don't do something about this? Some of them are the big existential questions like the climate change one. If we don't do anything about this, they are going to deal with the consequences.
But this is the first time I've heard you talk about the environment.
Right, yeah. Because again, if you're talking about the core things that I think all the time, I want to start with the personal introduction and then the economic focus of the campaign. Because the simple fact is, Green New Deal isn't a big winner for a lot of people in this district. Right? But it's a big part of my argument, and it is a significant part of my platform. When people ask questions about it, and I've had great conversations about this with actual historically Republican voters who sat down and said, okay, Green New Deal, how do you pay for this thing? And I was like, really? Okay. And I went into it. And I actually went through the numbers for it, and I showed the benefits for them. We talked about some of the cost-benefit analysis and the returns on investments you get from investment in things like infrastructure. Simple fact is, infrastructure is always a 3-to-1 return on investment and productivity gains. Right? It's not wasted money. It's not like here's some free cash, go blow it on something. It actually helps everyone to get a bit richer. right? So you can make an argument for things like that that still can appeal to them. But to a more democratic audience, oh yeah, climate change is an existential crisis, and if we don't do something about it, we are in serious trouble. I mean, some of the numbers there, often throw people off, especially since in scientific papers you're looking at like changes in degrees centigrade or whatever here. I'm like, oh, what does that mean, right? You know that we're going to have heat waves in the southern United States that will get so hot, right, that people who step outside the shade will literally have heat stroke and drop dead. That it will kill all mammal life that's not in undercover, right? You move up by 2 degrees and we are in serious trouble, right? And any significant die-off has a ripple effect, right? This insect kills off this fish, which kills off this bird or this mammal, and and it moves up the line there, and eventually it starts affecting, all of our food production, and it just completely destroys, our lifestyles. We have to adapt, right? So. That's one really big reason for me, right? And one reason one thing that I would like to focus on there, if we're talking about the kind of future we're leaving behind, taking care of that kind of an issue and not kicking it down the field. It's not like all the sessions about global warming is new. This was all discussed in the 1960s. All of this was known. We just kept ignoring it. And it's time to pay the piper.
Couple comments. This is, hopefully a boost for you. We saw what happened in Orange County and how it flipped. Okay, so it gives us confidence that if that happened over there, we can get it done here. So, kudos, we're pulling for you too. Secondly, I saw this on Lawrence O'Donnell. This is a professor, and I shared it with the group before. And she predicted that Trump would win. Predicted he would be impeached. And they asked her a question, why do you think he won? And her response was, and this kind of hits on some of the comments you're making about the voter, that they thought that he could not possibly win against Hillary, that the Democrats didn't come out, which is that vote you're talking about that doesn't come out. So what other things do you think your campaign is working on or focusing on to get that vote?
Well, if I can add a couple of things to the first part there, I can't resist that kind of discussion, because I was one of the ones that said Trump could win too, right? And it was a very unpopular argument. I made the same kind of argument actually in 2004. In Kerry v. W, right? And it was like, oh, Kerry's totally gonna win this. I was the only person in a political science seminar to say, no, he's totally gonna lose, right? There are a lot of other factors that get involved, and we tend all to be in our own bubbles and not recognize the problems other people had. Michael Moore actually called Trump's win for exactly the right reasons, right? Those basic working class issues, and the fact that Trump was talking about them even though he was being dishonest about it. And Clinton had the most progressive platform the Democratic Party has run on in decades, and she didn't talk about it. She talked about how bad Trump was. She didn't campaign on it, she didn't push those policy issues, and she didn't campaign in the Midwest. That's on us. Trump's turnout in that election is the same that Romney got. He literally got no better. He did no better. In terms of the actual vote total, Democrats chose to stay home, right? And if we don't turn up, they win. So it's a small difference there. So we do have to energize people.
And don't let the other candidate walk behind you.
Oh my God.
That's amazing.
That's called
super creepy.
peacocking.
I admire her poise. Because I want to turn.
I would have slapped him.
Yeah. I mean, he is not a great human being anyway. But it is a sign of just how much trouble we're in, to me, right? The fact that, see, one of the things that bugs me about our discussions today in the United States, and I think this does affect our district as well, we tend to get hyper-focused on a single issue. And Trump bad, right, really resonates with a lot of people. Trump bad, oh yes, Trump is terrible. And we talk about Trump. Trump is not the problem, he's a symptom of the problem, right? And if we keep ignoring the symptoms, we will get worse than Trump. Reagan was horrifying, right? And I like, oh, please don't get worse than this. We elected W. right? And because we ignored a lot of those basic issues, right? And, oh, it can't get worse than like, let's dump some more arsenic in the water. Oh, it can, right? And Trump is no better in policy terms than others. He's doing the same thing. It's the same kind of like typical Republican regulatory capture, they call it, where they put lobbyists in charge of different regulations so they can consciously unravel the whole point of government. And then they can put incompetent people in charge of things so things fail. And then you can make the argument next time around, see, look, government just fails every time. Well, that's because you put an idiot in charge, deliberately. But we don't learn the lesson. Reagan pioneered that strategy, and we're still doing it. Right? So paying attention to the real issues, I think, is how we win. Right? When we focus on just defeating a particular person, like whether it's Calvert or Trump, and focus on that, and we don't focus on the real solutions and the real problems, we're doing all of ourselves a disservice. So one of the things that I try to do, and I'll be very optimistic about this, turnout is going to be high, people do want to get Trump out of there. I think the 42nd is winnable. Right? I know it's a hard fight, and we are still struggling to raise money nationally, I'll tell you that. Even to me trying to show up on national media stuff, I've got a radio interview coming up again. I'm always trying to get out there and raise the profile and get attention. But people don't want to invest in us, so it's going to be hard. It is winnable, right? But one of the things that matters to me one way or the other is that if we're doing the right thing, it still helps. If we're advancing the argument, if we're pushing back against the real problems. Right? But I am going to put every single bit I've got into this because I think it can be won, and I think if we're running on the right kinds of issues, and if we get people to think about the right kind of issues, it will matter, and it can motivate more people to come on board. So
That's good.
Anything else?
Don't be off that easy.
We're taking it all in right now.
Besides voting for you, what do you think we need to be prioritizing for you to get it right?
Okay, what was that?
Money.
Oh, that's one. Yeah. So this is always. I have to beg for money, please. It's like the single worst part about politics for me, right? Anyway, that's what makes the whole clean elections part super easy. I don't want to call up millionaires and ask for money, right? But I have a hard time asking anybody. My family's always joked about that for years. It's hard to Mom, can I borrow some money? But so that's one, right? It does matter. Elections do cost money. The key things that I want to spend money on, I can commit that I'm not going to waste a dime on things that aren't going to be helpful to us. So I'm not going to put a TV spot out there because most people aren't watching TV ads for politicians anymore, right? They're either TiVoing past them or they just don't watch TV at all and they just have Netflix or whatever they're watching there. So, or billboards on the side of the 91. Right? What's the point? Right? They're extremely expensive. Right? Smaller scale advertising, signs do matter. Right? Putting some signs up matters. Getting some small material into the hands of volunteers so they can go out and share some things. So there's some little things that show up there. Some little things that you can give to people. And have people getting out door to door. The volunteers out there knocking doors. Right? That's always helpful. And having some people involved in doing that, or phone banking, or text banking, sending messages to people. So I have a sign-up sheet if anyone is interested in volunteering with us. You can do everything from hosting a meet and greet in your house, where I can come in and make a pitch and answer questions to any of your friends or neighbors, inviting people that didn't see me, inviting people that might hate me. Let me talk to your Trumpist neighbors. Right? I enjoy that kind of thing. And I don't do it by yelling at people either. So it's
Once they turn off Fox News so they can listen to you.
Yeah. Anybody will come over. So hosting meet and greets, doing phone banking or text banking, sending things out like that. Donations help. Word of mouth helps. Right? Anything if you're talking to anybody else, it's like, hey, you got to check out Liam. Maybe he'll meet you for coffee or something. Anything like that is helpful.
One of my heroes is AOC. Had nothing to do with her politics. She's bold, and she's charismatic, and she's basically a fighter. So all the things you just said are really nice, but no one will ever remember them. My question to you is, what is your plan to get in front of 1,000 people, get in front of 3,000 or 5,000 people. You get in front of 1,000 people, the press enterprise can't ignore you like they're always going to do. You know, you go to your little small coffee thing, which is great, but you're never going to do the newspaper. So that's what I'm saying, you got to be bold. So I hope you are getting a plan where you can get in front of 1,000 people, and then you can say charge. You know, because all the little things are nice, but you know, you got to reach the masses.
You're preaching to the choir there in terms of what I would want to do and what we could do. Again, if a lot of the resources were available. One of the things I've done to help make up for that is some of the video interviews that I've done. I've got some video interviews that have been seen by 40,000 people. So I've found ways to get some attention that way. But getting the logistics of planning large events out here, they cost a lot of money.
But
Like
I would
money.
think you're a chaplain, you curtain school. You've got to have some smart little kids there that can go on Twitter and YouTube and all that and help you create some buzz.
They're good, yeah, but it's still, in order to do a large event, there are a lot of logistical issues to it. We could get people to turn up for something like that, and I want to do things like that absolutely in the general. There's a lot of discussions with that. I've had discussions with a potential host for things like that. There's a possibility even of trying to get into the stadium in Elsinore. Right? There's a lot of things that we're like looking into about what we can do if we can build that up, but nothing is free to do that. So crossing that hurdle. AOC is brilliant with a lot of that stuff, but she came into it with a lot more donors who threw cash at her for it, right? When people like Justice Democrats stepped up and gave her starting cash there, and then she managed to build a large enough internet following to have people donating all over the country. We've been trying to build it a little bit that way. I've gotten a number of small donors across the country. I've gotten donations from Florida, Illinois, all over the place there. It's not on the same level because the starting resources were a little lighter. I mean, her being in a solidly Democratic district really helped, right, in terms of like the money that she could raise in her general election, right? But I completely agree with you, right?
You mentioned the 42nd, and to me, it's a question of what is the voice of the 42nd, because that is what people will listen for. You mentioned that we don't have a university here. Is that a catalyst for moving forward? Just a thought. I'm not saying that it is, but I'm saying that if we're really serious about what the 42nd is about, what is the voice of the 42nd? Because that voice just may be drowned out, right?
It does, and actually, Orange County in some ways works against us. Because they will be concerned to hold all of those seats. And tons of money is going to be dumped into holding, because Orange County was the most Republican county in the state for a long time. And it's wealthy, right? So pouring tons of resources in to hold those is going to be tricky there. But what is the voice of like a lot of these different districts? We keep getting like run over. Like what does it mean? One of the things that that's okay. Voice of the 42nd, right? Are you the voice of the 42nd?
No, but the 42nd does have Latinos. It does have people who are labor unions, and it does have women's groups. Why can't they help sponsor your 1,000 or 5,000 audience? Wouldn't it be to their advantage to have an advocate for them?
We absolutely are trying. I mean, a lot of the things, in some places there aren't significant civil society groups that can do it. I've been trying to reach out and find strong voices for the Hispanic community in the 42nd, and they really don't have a lot of like political advocacy groups that would be able to step up and do that. The mosques were actually more interested in that than I found amongst the Hispanic community because of against Trump. Unions as well have been helpful, but the unions are also they know something in the history of the district, but a lot of them are really interested. But a lot of discussions, some of them want to wait until after the primaries or this or that, and blah blah blah. They'll dump in money down. Really? But it is an issue. Long term. One of the things that stands out to me, right? And the university is one of that, because if you're going to talk about long-term development out here, university and trade schools both matter, right? And providing good access to these things, to more people would matter here. The simple fact is, we don't have a lot of solid economic development. What people complain about the traffic all the time. And I love this. This is one of the things that I can actually respond to at the federal level, because traffic is technically a state and county issue. It's not really a federal question at all, right? So, like, can you solve the traffic issue? Okay, let's talk about why the traffic is there. That's where I can intervene here. Because the traffic exists because 30% of people in our area have to commute out for work. Right? Because the jobs aren't here. We have bedroom communities people move out to because they can't afford to live in Orange County or LA County, and they move here, and then they fill up the 91 or the 15. Right? So the trick is, how do you develop the local economy? The businesses coming out here, I mean, I swear I was at an Elsinore City Council meeting, and that mayor was just like, and we got a Popeyes, I'm winning here, we're getting tons of this. I'm like, really, this is like your vision for economic development? I mean, great, we have a Popeyes, that's fantastic, but can we do better, right? Look at a lot of the logistics jobs we've been getting in the warehousing, right? You know, do we need more logistics jobs? You know, those aren't going to survive anyway. They're all going to be run by robots. You're going to have like one guy and a dog running the whole factory, right? The guy to feed the dog, the dog with the rats out, and have the entire thing. Right? And the simple fact is, that's where a lot of jobs are going. And that's something a lot of politicians aren't talking about either. We have to start paying attention to some of the bigger long-term issues, and they are going to hit a lot of districts like ours that don't already have a lot of economic development, right? And we're going to lose some of the areas that people have been investing, like those logistics jobs there. 43% of American jobs are at risk of disappearing in the next couple of decades. Right? It's not just factories with like the robots building their cars anymore. It's the service sector jobs, tons of white-collar jobs, right? Tons of office workers are going to disappear because of artificial intelligence, right? And we're not preparing for that at all, right? So if we want a voice for the district, it's to say, hi, we're here too. There's 1 million of us out here. We would like actually to develop our local economy, right, and not be left behind, you know, on all these other changes that are going to happen.
If you were in Iowa right now and you're going to be voting in a month from now, who would you be voting for?
I've never liked questions like that in this kind of thing here. There's a real difference between, like, you know, Professor Liam and trying to be a nice political...
Which one is your philosophy closest to?
Does anyone have any guesses?
Progressive.
Bernie. Are you a Bernie?
Bernie Elizabeth.
No, Elizabeth.
I have a few areas of disagreement. I'm closer to Sanders than anyone else, you know, currently in the field. This is it's tough to kind of like, you know, really do in just a minute here, but the core elements of policy matter more to me than anything else, and integrity matters a lot. The simple fact is, Sanders was arguing for marriage equality in the 1970s. He's taken unpopular positions for decades and never backed down from them, and over time they have become the popular ones, so he keeps being proven right over and over again. I respect that. But I also respect the policies. There are a few things, I wish he talked about things like automation more, right? And he doesn't, right? There are a few areas where I would like to push him a bit, and some of his ideas are a bit old school. But he has a better understanding of how far to the right we've drifted, and how we need to get back more to an FDR to Johnson sort of vision, right, of what the Democratic Party used to be. And the simple fact is, most of the people actually running in the race are pretty far to the right in their policies. Even some people that people think are far to the left, like Andrew Yang, who does talk about automation, his policies overall are neoliberal. He's actually pretty far to the right. Right? There's only a few areas of interesting overlap there. Right? So that, I like that he's helping to mainstream an idea like that, but it's not enough. Right? Yang's UBI, it doesn't work. The way that he's done it would be harmful. The idea as a whole isn't.
And you think Bernie's formula works?
What was that?
Medicare for all from Bernie, do you think his formula works?
The way he can pay for it, yes. Right? If it manages to get through, the numbers on it work. Right? But that's me being an egghead. I tend to look at the details of policy. Most people don't, right? And that's one of the tricks in politics too. Is like that, you know, the quick few minutes, the message discipline that comes out there. I'm naturally much more of an egghead than a politician. You know, that I'm sure is obvious, right? So I tend to pay attention to that. But anyway, so that's my position there, but I don't have a problem with anybody else's choices, and honestly, anybody is going to be a massive improvement, right? I mean, any of my cats would be a significant improvement. So I will have no compunctions throwing 110% of my energy into backing any Democrat that's running against Trump in 2020, right? But in terms of like the policy issues, yeah.
You didn't touch on immigration at all. I'm just kind of curious about how you stand on that.
That's a tricky one there too, especially for an area like this where it tends to show up as a very hot button issue, especially for more conservative voters who are terrified of it. One of the things that I try to do in having those conversations, and this is a framing trick. Oftentimes if you run head on into an issue and you start contradicting somebody, you've already lost them. People dig their heels in, they close their ears, it's done, right? So the trick is to find a way to get around it, right? And to like leave enough interesting crumbs that people find their own way to think through it. I try to talk about some of the basic economics of it. The simple fact is, immigration has always been a net benefit, right? That immigration actually creates jobs, right? That immigrants have higher rates of entrepreneurship than native-born people and lower rates of criminality. The problem here is that they've got an echo chamber that's giving them false information, and you can't say your facts are false, here's my other numbers, because they're kind of conditioned to say, well, your numbers are fake and and it's all done. Right? So it's a hard one to kind of approach out here. There's a reason I try not to bring it up initially, because I'm solidly in favor of people being able to live where they want to live. And I think the people that choose to live here, that want to live here and contribute to the United States, have always made it a better country and a better place to live. Right? I'm grateful that my ancestors were able to walk into this country and settle in, right? But they face the same kind of questions. One of the things that I try to, in some context, get at, and this is just being a historian again too, the sort of fears that people have today about immigration have been repeated over and over again in our history. They're not, they actually haven't changed. The arguments are literally the same. And that's true if you go back to like the early 20th century at the height of the KKK, when they were talking about Southern Europeans, Catholics and Jews, right? Or you go back to the middle of the 19th century with the Know Nothing movement when they were attacking like the Irish immigrants or whatever. It's always the same kind of fears, that they won't assimilate or this or that, or the drunks, or bringing crime, right? And they're wrong every time. So if I can get someone to talk long enough and I can just talk through the issues historically, I find that actually works better than throwing the numbers at them and showing like, look, your statistics are just false, right?
Why is it so difficult for I'm not talking about the people on the right, I'm just talking about the people on the left. Why is it so difficult for us to come to a meeting of minds regarding this issue?
I think it's true on a lot of issues. Part of it actually gets back to some of the basic, differences in neurology, really. Conservative temperaments come together more easily around a single issue. With us, it's more like herding cats, right? People tend to take their own particular views, and they have a hard time finding a sense of like broader solidarity and working together. And we'd much rather argue amongst ourselves. And part of that just comes from the more liberal personality types are the ones that are always like pushing forward and coming up with new ideas in the first place. I've often run into, this is another interesting one that comes up here, because people will say like, well, your side's just wrong, and they want to like think that, well, realistically, liberal and conservative approaches to life, they co-evolve for a reason, right? We've always been there. There are some people that kind of like push forward and come up with new ideas and bring in new influences and challenge us, and other people who pull back a little bit and provide a certain stability, right? To hold a culture together, to hold family life together, right? There's a constant push and pull. In the long run, conservatives have always been wrong, right? Because we've always ended up in a different place. Because the core element, I don't mean conservative in like the sense of like some particular politics or a party. I mean like conservatism as an idea says there should be very little change, and what change there is should always just follow tradition, right? It should stick with the traditional idea. Traditions always evolve, cultures always evolve, things change over time, but they're long spans of time, and we are not wired to recognize that. So we repeat the same, I find this in classes, is we repeat the same kind of arguments people have had for literally thousands of years. I can pull elements out from the news on any given day of an argument in Washington, D.C. and show them examples, right? From 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, people having the same dispute, right? We just repeat the same patterns. It's hard to kind of like get past our own particular pet issues and to find something to kind of like rally around, right? And I think that's always going to be a challenge for our side of the argument. It's something that we just have to deal with. One of the things that helps, I think, is if you find a particular connecting issue. This is one of the reasons that I tend to focus on working class issues or like, the basic like living standards, because I can tie it to everything. I can connect that to immigration. I can connect that to climate change investment. I can connect that to healthcare. Anyone's individual issue that they come up with, that they have a particular concern with, I can find a way to center it in my campaign's core issues, right? Which means that I can stick with the kind of core issues that I want to try to reach out to some of those independents that we need to sway, but still be able to respond to all of our issues and say, okay, I hear your concern, here's how I will deal with that issue, and I've already seen how it fits together. I think if we can find something like that, right? And some of the best campaigns that we've seen in this country have had a kind of central issue like that they've been able to connect other things to. Warren hasn't like that, Sanders hasn't like that.
I think we, nice to meet you, and thank you for coming to meet us, and we enjoyed a lot of the things you said, and we're going to take some of those to heart, and maybe we'll be on your step, you never know.